Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for the webinar and provide a little bit of background context for today's discussion. We have quite the lineup of speakers who will be presenting on their projects from NSF's GOLD solicitation. First, we'll hear from Brene King, who's at Kansas State University. Then Grady Dixon from Fort Hays State will be talking about two projects. First, his own group's project, and then another project on my behalf. And that will be followed by Anne-Marie Nunez from Ohio State University, and then finally Corey Garza, who's at California State University. All 5 projects were developed from an original NSF solicitation, which was called the Geoscience Opportunities for Leadership and Diversity, which was posted in the beginning of about 2016. This open solicitation was posted for applicants to submit preliminary proposals that would ultimately decide who would be invited to a 5-day Ideas Lab workshop. The preliminary proposals were short documents that outlined our professional summaries and our scholarship or expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion research and practice. NSF also requested that we address 4 specific personal attributes within those preliminary proposals. The first was our team building skills. The second was about research communication. The third was about how well we would handle new experiences. And lastly, we needed to discuss our personal and professional gains from participating in an opportunity such as this. A total of about 30 applicants were invited to participate in the Ideas Lab, and that was held in March of 2016. So for those of you who are not familiar with an Ideas Lab, I'd like to briefly explain the experience, because it was pretty intense actually. In the beginning of the week, we had many different activities that helped all of the participants meet each other and basically get introduced to one another, and it really allowed us to form a community. We then moved into games and activities that encouraged open communication and brainstorming regarding somewhat complex topics about diversity. And then with each passing day, we were put into groups, given tasks, and presented on our ideas, and then broken up and put into brand new groups, and we had to do it all over again and present brand new ideas to the group all over again. And so by the end of the week, we were starting to form more solidified ideas about how to address our diversity, equity, and inclusion challenges in the geosciences. And so it was at this point we were able to self-select which groups we wanted to participate in and figure out how we could contribute to each group. And then these group formed more concrete project ideas. So then on the last day, each group was asked to pitch their project idea to the NSF representatives who were in attendance. And then within a week or so after the workshop, NSF invited certain groups to submit full proposals, which were then due earlier that summer, or early in the summer. From this, a total of 5 projects were funded through the GOLD solicitation and from the Ideas Lab. And so this webinar gives a snapshot of each of these 5 different projects. So first, we'll start with Brene, who will talk about Sparks for Change. So Brene, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Heather, and hello, everyone. As Heather mentioned, my name is Brene. I currently work at Kansas State University, and I'm one of the co-PIs on the Sparks for Change Gold Grant. Our lead PI is Dr. Robert Kirsch, who is located at Arizona State University. In their Leadership and Interdisciplinary Studies department. Since we don't have a lot of time for this presentation, I do encourage you to check out our website that's listed on this slide for more detailed information about our project. Slide. So the idea, our initial idea for our grant came about after a candid conversation with one of our co-PIs who's an underrepresented, he's an early career faculty member from an underrepresented group. And at one point during the GOLDS Lab, we really just asked him what he needed to be successful in his career and what a grant like this could help him with. He listed several different things, but one thing that stood out to a lot of us was a need for additional support within his department. And that's not to say that his department didn't support or recognize his current activities related to broadening participation, that there were some issues in regards to how they valued that work. We recognize that there's a general support for broadening participation in geosciences, but that sometimes that may compete with current promotion and tenure practices. And another issue that we wanted to tackle was a lack of cross-institutional dialogue related to increasing minority participation in the geosciences. So what can we learn by having the opportunity to speak with historically Black colleges and universities, or Hispanic serving institutions or community colleges. And so a lot of those issues we kind of wrapped up and described as institutional inertia. And the goal of our grant is to combat this institutional inertia. Slide. So what we think is unique about our project is that we aim to address this institutional inertia through small group theory. So more specifically, we're using small groups as change agents. So there's literature that talks about the success of having small groups of committed people with clear goals being able to alter institutions. And so our small groups, which we refer to as triads, contain a spark, who is an early career faculty member. There's a partner, who is someone with institutional experience, which we define as a tenured faculty member or department head or chair, and they reside in the same department as our spark. And they have the desire to collaborate and innovative change making. Lastly, there's a sponsor who's an outside person with a vested interest in guiding broadening participation efforts. Each of these individuals has a specific role to play. So our spark brings innovative ideas to the group, and they also talk about and identify potential roadblocks to their success that they can discuss within their group. The partner is there to help support the spark. They do this by helping to refine the ideas that the sparks bring to them, but they also directly oversee departmental change. And so that's why we wanted somebody with this institutional experience, so they can be in the position to do that. And the sponsor is there to provide support for the institutional team as well as a long-term vision for broadening participation. And we wanted all of our participants to be confident in their roles, and we aim to do this through leadership development. So our sparks get specific training and develop in adaptive leadership, a dynamic process of shared influence used to impact their environment. The partner gains skills in transformational leadership, which is aimed at inspiring others to achieve unexpected or remarkable results. And then the sponsor gains skills in solidarity leadership, which is aimed to diminish isolation of a group, energize collaborators, and to help unify the group through providing their own perspective and experience. Slide. So we sent on an application process. We identified our institutional partners to serve as partners in Sparks, and then we solicited the help of various sponsors. We proposed in our grant to hold this Sparks for Change Institute that would bring all of our various triads together so they could meet face to face. This institute allowed us to present information about the various leadership characteristics and also get the ball rolling on action planning that we're asking of for each of our triads. In addition to being one of the deliverables in our grant, this is the clear goals that I was talking about for our specific small groups. So in day one, we really focused on building a supportive community. We didn't put our participants in their triads and did a lot of activities to just help build that community. And then we had some initial leadership development. Day two, we split up our groups into just the Sparks, just the partners, and just the sponsors. And we had them talk about specific leadership characteristics that I discussed, but also spent time sharing some institutional knowledge in these separate groups. And then we put all of our triads together, and they started talking about a shared vision for their department or things that they saw as areas of development that they wanted to work on. Something that we thought was very successful for our Sparks Institute was we incorporated time for our evaluators to talk about action planning. What is an action plan? How do you develop it? And then our evaluators had individual time with each of our triads, which all of our participants really enjoyed. In day three, our triads then presented their initial action plans to the group and got feedback from the group as a whole. Slide. This is an image of all the participants in our groups. We were very excited about the success of our institute, and we mainly think that that was based on the diversity of our participants. So we have participants from R1 universities, minority serving institutions, national labs, community colleges, and teaching focused institutions. And because of all of that diversity and wealth of knowledge, we were able to have some very meaningful conversations and a lot of knowledge sharing between our participants. And so that kind of goes back to having those cross-institutional dialogues And also being able to have those interactions really contributed to some valuable suggestions for the initial action plans. Slide. So some of the ideas that came out of some of our initial action plans were focused on our Sparks and the success and advancement of our Sparks. So some of that came out in the form of training and mentorship for them, when to say yes, when to say no, how best can they work with their time. There was also several groups that wanted to work on how the early career faculty member, our Spark, can incorporate their current interests in broadening participation into their career goals, and how can that help with their advancement. We had several of our partners that wanted to review the departmental promotion and tenure packages, which is great. And then the last bullet actually kind of speaks to, we brought together 8 different triads, and each of those triads in their departments were in different locations or different places as far as how their department deals with diversity and inclusion issues. And so one of our departments really just wanted to build the community within their department. So they wanted to have more fun and social activities so that they could have their senior faculty, early career faculty, and students interacting together. And then once they build a stronger community, then maybe they can start talking about some more in-depth diversity and inclusion topics. We have several other preliminary data that we're working on, from interviews to surveys, and we look forward to sharing that out once we have the results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brene. And now we'll hand it off to Grady.
Hey, everyone. I appreciate you taking some time to listen to all of these descriptions. As Heather mentioned, I'm going to describe a couple of these, one of which you can see here, the Hearts of Gold, of which I ended up being the PI, and it's been a really exciting and rewarding process so far. I would argue, as far as being involved with the geosciences community at large, this has been the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my career. So I'm really excited to be talking about the project. But I've got to give credit where credit is due. This was not my idea. Primarily LaToya and Kathy, that you see on the slide here, are the ones who created this concept, and they brought in the rest of us as they saw some needs that we were able to help them with. I am currently at Fort Hays State. You can see a couple of social media accounts there that I encourage you to follow for more information related to these 2 projects. And let's go ahead and look at the next slide. We were told at our Ideas Lab, in a somewhat memorable exchange that became crucial for all of the PIs, that we were going to be focusing less on students and more on senior scientists. And the argument was that we've tried the approach with students for many, many years, and in some ways it's working, but in other ways it's not. And this slide is somewhat dated, but the point is still valid, and that is that we are getting increased representation from certain groups at the student level, and we're getting them less and less as you go farther beyond, name a level, whether it's high school or college or whatever. And by the time you get to, say, senior scientist positions, we have an embarrassing low percentage of representation. So there is a quote unquote leak in the pipeline, and that's what brought NSF and others to this idea of focusing on leadership, is because we think there must be, and evidence suggests that there is, a problem with the working environments, and that people that are qualified and eager to be geoscientists just don't want to be working in the environments that we've been creating, due largely to a lack of diversity. Next slide. So the solution from the Hearts of Gold was to find senior scientists that fit a particular mold, albeit a kind of loose mold, but we wanted them to be well respected. We wanted them to be secure in their own accomplishments in the discipline. We wanted them to also have a history of being supportive of diversity efforts, having worked with underrepresented groups, but maybe not necessarily being outspoken and not being known for their advocacy of diversity. And we wanted to try and teach these people to be more confident and competent in discussions with their colleagues about the value of diversity to themselves and to geosciences. And we initiated a bunch of requests for nominations last year, and the goal was to bring in 20 or 25 participants last summer for our first, what we called the Gold Institute. And it was a 2-day session to really, it was just a relatively intense diversity training session that obviously had the motivation of trying to make these people advocates. And you can see here, these are the universities and institutions that were represented by our initial training session last summer. The goal is to have another event next summer, which I'll talk about again momentarily. Next slide. One of the key components of our training was the concept of allophilia, which, not to spend too much time on it here, is essentially an affinity for others, those that are unlike you. Obviously trying to crave interaction with those outside of your quote unquote group. And that's also one of the things that we're testing, because obviously one of the more challenging components of these projects is not just to do the projects, but to assess the projects. And so this is a quick screen grab of at least one of the surveys that we have given to the participants before and after their participation in Hearts of Gold, essentially trying to come up with a quantitative assessment of how their allophilia might have changed through their interaction with colleagues and discussion of diversity topics in the training session. Next slide. The company that we worked with is called the Knapsack Institute, and you can see the two experts that were participating in this particular training session for us. The Knapsack Institute is actually being used by at least two of the NSF GOLD projects. They've got an excellent reputation, and they really are able to focus on the types of questions and problems that we're dealing with. They happen to be located at University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, which was also the approximate location that a few of our projects wanted to be set up, just due to travel logistics and general weather and climate and enjoyable attributes of being in that part of the country for the summer. And so you may see this a couple of times, locations that were in Colorado for summer training or that use Knapsack Institute, and we were just like that. So next slide. Well, we've been through one training session. We are now ramping up our second year of nominations. So I encourage you now, if you know anyone that fits the mold of, I don't want to say senior scientist, but let's say experienced, respected, accomplished scientist, and someone that is interested in maybe learning how to be an advocate or a stronger advocate for diversity, please nominate them. We have a website and lots of other methods that you can go to and nominate these folks. But last year we received 70 nominations, and that's about what we were aiming for. We thought that would be a good number, but we were a little nervous about the acceptance rate. And so we figured if we wanted 20 or 25, 70 would give us a deep pool. We sent out an initial set of invitations, 28 total. And based on NSF acceptance rates, when people are invited to be reviewers, we were told to expect maybe a 15 to 20% acceptance rate. And we actually received 86%. Obviously, we had already found a pretty selective bunch of people that we thought were highly likely to say yes. But this was a result in the beginning that was pretty shocking in a positive way. And it tells us there is a need out there. There is a quote unquote market. There are scientists that know they want to do this and know they don't know how. We only had 4 people decline, and I'm pretty sure all 4 of those, it was due to schedule conflicts, not due to a lack of interest. So this greatly exceeded our expectations. Now we're in the process of doing post-training surveys and trying to figure out what these participants took away from the training, but also how are they using it and how can we encourage them to continue using it. And I think right now at this point in our project, that's the most challenging thing, is not just to make a change in somebody, but to make that change and then to continue to nurture that change. And of course, we will eventually, we hope, reach a critical mass where this becomes much easier. Next slide. Here's the website. I really hope that you'll go check this out if you haven't already. This has a link from the website to nominate people for the 2018 Gold Institute, which will be held in late July, again in Colorado Springs. If you have questions, you are welcome to email me. I encourage you to hit me up on Twitter or contact one of the other co-PIs. We are also going to have 5 returning participants from last year that are going to act as kind of mentors and also as a bridge between the 2017 and 2018 cohorts. Again, encouraging interaction and a sustainable result after the training is done. We also have some more qualitative and quantitative data to collect from the participants. And of course, the ultimate goal is to publish some of these results so that other entities throughout the geosciences can start applying similar models to enhance diversity with their colleagues. All right, next slide. So we're shifting gears now, and as Heather mentioned, I'm going to discuss Geos, which is the third project of the day. And this was, I think, partially because Heather's running the webinar. She didn't want confusion as to what her role was here. And I was originally involved with Geos in the original Ideas Lab just for a small bit. So I at least saw this when the idea was being formed, and you can see the list of PIs here. Let's go ahead into the details. I really like telling people about this project. I think this is arguably the riskiest project, with the greatest risk, but also potentially the greatest return. I think it's certainly, in my opinion, only the most novel of the 5 projects that were funded. And the general idea is that this group is partnering with a company called Immersion Incorporated. And Immersion essentially creates immersion experiences. They create artificial or virtual experiences so that people can practice how they interact with professionals. And in this case, the goal is to create simulated professional meetings, faculty meetings, committee discussions on hiring, such like that, and then allow professionals, allow faculty, allow scientists to interact with these avatars in potentially awkward situations, where someone says something that is meant to exclude a particular group, and then it's your job as a responsible scientist to stand up and correct that wrong in a productive way. This obviously takes practice, and most of us don't get that practice very frequently, and so that's the purpose of this project. Next slide. This is one of the quotes that was collected as part of the initial data collection process to get information to populate the simulations. So you want these simulations to be real, so this group has actually surveyed colleagues to get text of actual offensive events and then use that so that these interactions are believable. I'm not going to read the text here because I certainly won't do it justice, but I hope that you'll take the time there to get an idea of essentially a senior scientist telling a junior scientist that because she's a woman, she's probably less capable of doing field work. And these are the types of data that are used to run the simulations. Next. This is a screenshot just to give you an idea of this is, obviously a video game type of simulation. They are not real photos or videos or anything like that, but it is meant to be an immersive type experience. Next. And then this is the schedule. The workshop initially introduces the participants into some concepts that we're not as familiar with as most of us would like, and that is just general social structures and the idea of privilege and power. And of course, recognizing things like microaggressions and our own implicit biases, dealing with emotional triggers and knowing how to avoid them, but recognize them and deal with them when they happen. And then getting into the simulations. And so each participant will do at least 2 simulations, one while they are at the workshop. And then after they go through that the first time, they will discuss how to improve as they go forward. And then eventually they will do a second simulation when they get outside of the workshop. Next. And this is their goal moving forward, obviously, is once they get the participants off campus, is to do their second simulation. They're going to be at AGU coming up next month to report on some of their preliminary observations. And then again, their challenges like ours with Hearts of Gold is to keep the participants engaged. And the monthly journal club is, I think, intended primarily to keep their cohort thinking about these experiences. And then they're going to follow up with another simulation in April. At least that's the plan currently. All right, next.
Great. Thank you so much, Grady, for those wonderful presentations, and thank you for presenting about Geos on my behalf. You did a fantastic job. I really appreciate it. Next up is Anne-Marie, and she will be talking about the field project. Anne-Marie, take it away.
Hi. So I am here to talk about field work inspiring expanded leadership and diversity. And I'm a social scientist working with several other geoscientists and another social scientist to explore the organizational culture of fieldwork, and this idea that fieldwork can be a location of transformation in terms of education, but it can also be a site of exclusion. If you could do the next slide. The plan was to, we spent, my social science colleague and I spent a couple weeks each in field camps this summer, observing them like anthropologists. And in order to conduct kind of a needs assessment of how fieldwork might be more inclusionary. And then earlier in October, our whole team met in the Colorado State University Mountain campus to develop the program itself based on some of our findings. On October 6th through 8th of 2018, we're going to be holding a field institute. And I'll give you more information about that at the end, but we're going to be applying all that we learned and all that we know from the literature in order to build inclusive field work. And hopefully in the longer term, develop professional training and models for promoting inclusive field work. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to really briefly talk about our needs assessment. We conducted a cultural analysis. We participate, these are the social scientists. We observed and participated in field camps, and we were walking around with our field notebooks with everybody else taking notes. We had a very interesting representation of field camps. We had a very traditional undergraduate field camp where students were learning traditional like mapping skills and things like that, and then a graduate field camp, which was kind of a specialized coursework in geology and biology. Next slide. And that's just a picture of the graduate field camp, so you can get a sense of at least one of the sites. That was in the Sierras, kind of near Mono Lake. And then the next slide, with our what the social scientists found in our needs assessment is that the spatial and temporal boundaries that define the learning environment in typical classrooms are broken down, and that creates the potential to shift relational boundaries. So if we look at social aspects in a positive way, the field facilitates peer mentoring and intergroup interactions and bonding. But you know, as we all know, that it can also be a site for sexual assault and some of those boundaries to be challenged in ways that can make certain participants struggle. Physical, the field work tends to demand high performance. And so, you know, how do we kind of balance the adventure of being in the outdoors and going to these, in my case, both of our cases, going to remote locales with providing access for students who may have disabilities, for example. And then the academic power of learning up close, so you know, really learning how to look closely at phenomena, but also be able to step far away, and so to have different kinds of perspectives on geological phenomena. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the undergraduate field camp, and just illustrating, again, sort of the spirit and the camaraderie that can develop in the field. Next slide, please. So the kind of guiding question for field is, how can we leverage the things that make the field unique so that they can facilitate inclusion and minimize exclusion? And the next slide, I'll talk about the aims of this intervention. So again, you still have an opportunity to apply. It's going to be October 6th through 8th of 2018. And the aims will be to emphasize the unique and beneficial aspects of fieldwork that both complement and hinder inclusivity. At the same time, recognizing that instructors of fieldwork have tremendous responsibilities. So how can, you know, we maximize making these things integrated rather than solely additive? Second, to engage participants in learning about bystander intervention and other efforts to challenge exclusionary dynamics in fieldwork. We're going to have members from, we have paleontologists, we have ecologists, marine ecologists, social scientists, structural geologists. So leveraging multiple disciplines to bear on these questions. And then the way we're going to do it is through pre and post reflections, discussions, breakout sessions, and group feedback. And in this last slide, I'm going to encourage you all to pass this along with your colleagues and to consider applying. And I can share information with Heather about this. The deadline to apply is March 1st, 2018. And we're going to spend, each participant will spend 3 days with all of the team members, all of our principal investigators at the Colorado State University Mountain campus. The travel to the campus and meals there will be fully funded, and the lodging as well. And we actually individuals can apply. We're particularly interested in having teams as well that might be positioned to bring back change to their universities. I think we've heard a lot about the importance of having multiple people at the same institution involved. Examples that these people could serve are fieldwork leaders. They could be diversity champions or administrative leaders in their departments. So we're very open to the roles. I think it's more going to be articulating what they want to learn from the Institute. And so we hope you'll consider joining us in celebrating the camaraderie and inspiration of field activity to help make it more accessible for everybody involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for your presentation. And we are going to hand it off to Corey, who is our last speaker on the 5 gold projects. So Corey, take it away.
Thanks, Heather. So the project I'll be speaking about, it's called ASPIRE. The acronym stands for Active Societal Participation in Research and Education. And I'm serving as the lead PI on this particular project in collaboration with my colleagues, Julia Parrish from the University of Washington, Laura Harris, who's at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and Julie Passelt, who's at the University of Southern California. Can you get the next slide? So this project came out of the Ideas Lab and the Gold solicitation, with the sort of overarching sort of observation that the geosciences have some of the worst participation rates in regards to underrepresented groups. And what our team was thinking about is, why is it that you don't see sort of groups who might be considered historically underrepresented in the geosciences? Why don't they participate in the geosciences? And one of the realizations that we had, or observations that we had, is within the geosciences, we don't tend to make our science socially relevant. We tend to work within really small groups where maybe 5 or 10 people in the world are really going to care about that one little thing that you're working on, and we don't really expand out sort of our science, understand why society as a whole should care about it. And so our solution to that was to use place-based science as a way or a vehicle to try to bridge underserved communities and the broader geoscience community as a whole. And what we're doing here is we're using what's known as a working group model as a form for linking both underserved communities with the geosciences. Can I get the next slide, please? And so this idea was actually motivated in large part by a synthesis center that was funded by NSF for about 10 years, known as NC. This was the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And it was actually born out of this observation that the ecological sciences have started to silo themselves to some extent, and that over about the 50-year period, there was this large repository of data where people were working on the same questions, just in different locations. And someone had the idea that there were probably some emergent patterns and trends in there, that if you brought all that data together in large working groups, you could probably find sort of new ways or new areas of exploration within the ecological sciences. In fact, that's what happened, and became a very successful model for these type of working groups. And one of the lessons that you can take out of this is that the working group format, if you're to engage scientists with it, it has street cred within science. I believe there's some of these that focus on social science now. There's some that focus on evolutionary science. However, one of the downsides to these is that they tend to have little to no reach into communities. And so we want to take this model and actually bring it out into the communities where our geosciences could actually have some positive benefits. Next slide, please. And so what we're doing in part here within these working groups is we're using this concept of what we call a boundary spanner within these working groups to link the geosciences with diverse communities. And really briefly, a boundary spanner, there's someone who tends to have a foot in two worlds. Somebody who might, in fact, themselves come from an underrepresented community, but also at the same time actually be a recognized geoscientist. And we actually know quite a few people like this. And these individuals, they have the capacity to pretty seamlessly navigate between the two worlds and build bridges. And so what we're really doing is we're trying to understand what makes this type of person successful. How can we model their sort of leadership capacity within these types of groups and transfer that leadership capacity back into the broader geoscience community as a whole? Because in large part what this boundary spanner does, they help facilitate what we kind of term a virtuous exchange here. An exchange where there's sort of an equal sort of give and take between both these communities we're trying to serve and the geosciences as a whole. And then secondly, what we're trying to do here is we're also trying to work with the geosciences.
Perhaps not. What I'll do is I will ask one of the questions, actually, that came in from the audience to Anne-Marie, and it's about the field project. And one of the questions is, do the Field Institute recruits need to be from universities, or are government offices who do field work eligible as well? Anne-Marie, would you mind answering that question for us? Anne-Marie, are you there? Or do you have to unmute yourself?
Sorry about that.
There
I
you
started
are.
speaking and I was, yes. Thank you for asking that question. Definitely government agencies, people from government agencies that are doing field work, you know, other nonprofits that might be doing field work, individuals from those, we're open to all kinds of applications. Yes.
Okay, awesome, great. Thank you so
All right,
much.
can you hear me?
Corey, there you are. All right.
Yeah, the hotel I'm at, the network here is really unstable, so it went down.
Oh
Right.
no, I'm so sorry to hear that. Okay, well, we're back online. We can hear you now.
Yeah, they think they hit something over here. It keeps going in and out, so hopefully it'll stay here. Let me get sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can I get the next slide here?
Absolutely.
Okay. So these mobile working groups, how we think about them. So one of the differences between our working groups and working groups that might be in a traditional synthesis center is rather than taking place in a building or a set space, they actually take place out in the communities that we're looking to engage with. Okay. In fact, this is a requirement of any of these working groups, that they can't take place in a traditional sort of ivory tower setting. They have to take place out in that setting. They're usually going to be sort of comprised of about 10 to 15 members, usually evenly split between those from the geoscience community and those from the communities that we're looking to work within. They're going to meet for about 2 to 4 times each year for about 3 to 10 days per time. We have a pot of funding to help support these. Right now, we actually have 3 mobile groups that are starting up. One's based out of Lamont Doherty, where they're working on an atmospheric science problem with groups actually in the Manhattan, New York area. We have one up in the Northwest with Western Washington, where they're looking at ocean acidification impacts with clam gardens with the illumination. Then we actually have one with Baltimore County, where they're looking at sort of watershed and sort of water contamination issues in underserved communities there. And so those are our 3 that are getting spun up here. But a big part of what we're doing here is we're looking at how well do these types of mobile working groups actually engage diverse audiences in this case. And then 2, we're also looking at the boundary spanner here. So we have a social scientist who's working on looking at the boundary spanner and trying to assess what is it about what they're doing within these particular groups that's making them successful. And then at a future date, how do we translate that into leadership training for other geoscientists who want to try to bring their geoscience into sort of underserved communities? Next slide. And so this is the graph that we tend to use as to what Aspire is actually doing here. So this is a graph that my colleague Julia Parrish likes to use here. So on the lower right over there, she talks about sort of my generation of scientists, or even some extent underserved communities, that when we get into science, in some points we get into there because of the point of concern, environmental degradation, overfishing. And what we do is our science tends to go more toward the really highly applied solution-based aspect there. Whereas she talks about her generation, of geoscientists, where she may have come in at this point of wonder, just wanting to understand why something worked. So that leads her into this area of discovery. And so historically, those 2 sort of planes don't interact with each other. And so what Aspire is trying to do is to act as a bridge between the 2 so that we can facilitate that virtuous exchange that we talked about. Next slide, please. So right now we just finished our first year of the pilot phase. We did quite a bit of data mining there, looking at sort of case studies where people are actually trying to do this and synthesizing some of the best practices so that we can engage in some of our training needs for these working groups. We're hashing out a formal RFP. So for these first 3 groups, there were groups that kind of came recommended to us from colleagues at NSF, because we realized early on that there was no way we'd be able to get out an RFP in 1 year. But the actual formal RFP is coming out in the spring. We've identified our initial boundary spanners who are going to use our test cases here in these first working groups. And we're actually creating a nascent boundary spanner network. So it's one of the things we're trying to get these folks to interact with each other so that, 1, they can learn from each other, and also that they know that each other exists there. And then by the end of this project, one of the things we want to do is evaluate the leadership gain of boundary expanders, not just sort of what they're doing that's successful, but instead of being in these groups, what is it that they gained? And then the idea is in another phase of this, develop training modules for those geoscientists who are interested in getting out into communities to practice place-based science. Next slide. And so these are kind of what we sold as our wows for this particular project, in that when you think about broadening participation, is that you start to shift your problem origin in the geosciences. We're in the geosciences. Rather than coming from the traditional geoscience community, a lot of, in this particular model, your problem origin actually comes from the communities that you're working with here. And so in this sense, your geoscience becomes community relevant and becomes community driven. Leadership is that these leadership gains is that we start to develop a new type of leader here, somebody who understands how to bridge both the geosciences and the issues that might be persistent in underserved communities. And then in the geosciences as a whole, we're seeing this long-term potential for really reframing and rebranding the geosciences as more societally relevant, both at local and global scales. Next slide. And so in the future, what we want to see with the kind of leadership development in the geosciences, we want to sort of create an analog to what NCs did here. So NCs, what they engaged in was a lot of data mining and data analytics, which for the ecological sciences at the time was a real sort of shift in how things were done. But what came out of that was the big data scientists. It was a new type of ecologist that hadn't existed, prior to NCs coming around. With the SPI, what we're hoping to do is to change the types of creativity that we do in the geosciences, change the ways that we're productive, change all the confidence that we have in getting out into underserved communities and actually engaging in place-based science. And we're hoping is that a new type of leader emerges out of that. And again, we don't know what that's going to look like. We know it's going to look different. It's going to look unique. And we're hoping that they can take flight and kind of forge a new pathway in the geosciences. Next slide, please. Finally, just thinking long term, is that really moving to the geosciences into a new discovery space, it's really going to diverse talents and perspectives. And so we see this type of model as one way of doing that. And as part of this, you have to have leadership that really understands the benefits of diverse talent and how to cultivate that talent. And so in part, again, we're hoping by having these working groups, we start to train a new generation of leaders that can do this. And finally, the successful partnership between these new talents and leadership, they're going to result in some potential, but as of right now, unknown benefits to the geosciences. That should be my last slide.
Great, thank you so much, Corey, for your presentation, and I'm glad you were able to get back online when the internet kicked you off. So we do have about 13 minutes for discussion, which is fantastic. We did have some questions come in from the audience during all of the other folks' presentations, so I'll go ahead and get started with those. The first question is for Brene, and you said that partner could be a department chair and a spark could be a faculty, but could you give an example of a person who is a sponsor in your project? And don't forget to unmute yourselves when you're ready to speak.
Thanks. So our sponsors are established individuals in the geosciences. We have some social scientists. We have one retiree who went through the ranks of academia and was in NSF for a while. And so we looked within our inner communities, all of us PIs, and just thought about individuals within our fields that we thought might be able to provide that broader vision for our institutional teams. And so our sponsors kind of run the gamut of where they come from. They're extremely diverse, similar to our Spark and Partner groups.
Okay, awesome. Now, how were the folks in your project chosen? Did they have to discuss what they wanted to make a change in their department or institution, or did you have any qualifying criteria?
So we sent out an application that was actually mainly focused around just the Spark and the Partner, and just asking questions about kind of what was their previous kind of involvement with diversity and inclusion issues. And so I believe we had the Spark fill out a portion of our application, and then the Partner filled out a portion of the application, and it was a joint application. And then based off of kind of what we heard from the Spartan partners, we then started our solicitation for our sponsors. And we did briefly kind of talk about what they might want to do in their departments, but it was really just trying to recruit individuals that were engaged in diversity and inclusion issues and maybe wanted to help develop some of these topics or some of these activities or whatnot within their department. So having that want was really big for selecting of our participants.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you. We do have a general question. Yes, today's webinar, we are recording the webinar, and the slides and the presentations will be made available on our website once we are able to render the webinar. So anyone who is signed up for this webinar, you will get a notification when that recording will be made available. It will be in the next couple weeks or so. It might take a little bit longer due to the Thanksgiving holiday, but we will get it up online and you'll be able to share it with your colleagues and stream it for free. So thank you for that question. I have a question for Grady. Grady, you referred to having a diversity training for your attendees. Now, how did that move the attendees on your scale? Could you speak to that a little bit?
That's a great question, and that's currently still a question that we are trying to quantify. So any answer I can give is simply anecdotal, but I feel pretty strongly about that anecdotal response, and I think it was significant in a number of ways. One, just like I was pleased with our 80+% response rate, I think a lot of the participants may have been pleased seeing people like themselves in the room that had the desire to do these good things, but didn't have the tools, didn't have the experience. So at least a handful of these people, out of the 23 that participated, I can name maybe 5 or 6 that still correspond with me regularly, bring questions to me. Not that I have the answers, I bring questions to them as well, but they're sharing successes and challenges that they've been having just over the past few months since the training. That's great. We want that to expand, though, to 20 or more of these participants. We don't want it to be limited to just a small sample, or else this will never be a sustainable method for improving the problem that we face.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. We had a question come in that is kind of a hard-hitting question, and I'm going to open this one up to any of our discussants on the line. So we had someone that says, we're curious to know what the role that the PIs think that whiteness and white supremacy within the academic play in combating the lack of diversity within the field, and how the programs that we've outlined here today address this issue of white supremacy. Does anyone want to take that?
I'm happy to do that, Heather.
Thanks, Grady.
This is Grady. Yeah, this was a big part of that training that we had. It was intense, which is a word I think that almost every presenter used. It was meant to challenge everybody's perception on what it means to be successful and to face struggles. And a lot of that was facing your biases. And so given the makeup of a lot of geosciences and given the makeup of many people in the rooms we're training, whiteness is the obvious consistency. And I certainly don't claim to be anything close to an expert on this, but the more we have these conversations, especially with people of color, you start realizing what a challenge it is for them simply because they are not white. The argument may not be that they are a minority of whatever type, it's that they are not like the majority of the people in their profession. And once you kind of come to grips with that and you accept it and you're not offended by it, then it's one of those things that you see it everywhere you turn once you know to look for it. That's, again, only my perspective and only my opinion.
Yeah, and during our Ideas Lab and some of these intensive workshops that we've all been putting on, we have been through some more recognition and training about all different dimensions of diversity, and I think that becomes vitally important as we move forward, because what the current literature really demonstrates is that if you have a heterogeneous group of scientists working together on a common goal, they just straight up produce better science. So diversity produces better science, and it helps a business's bottom line. And that is really one of the big messages that we're trying to take away from this, is that it's not just it's not only the social justice issues anymore. It's not about Title IX anymore. It's about, if we want to really remain globally competitive in our science, if we want to really make those societal impacts and push the boundaries of our knowledge, diversity is the only way to do that. And so I think that also addresses some of your points, Grady.
And the other thing, Corey, it's like one of the things we also see, and I have a lot of colleagues, and I talk to them about this. This term you always hear on faculty search committees, fit. When you ask them to really define that, why didn't they take a certain candidate? You always hear they weren't a good fit,
right?
Even though they have the same CV as someone else. And when you really dig into it, it's sort of how one group sees sort of a social issue relative to another occasion. And I sometimes see that on my campus too. We have certain the social values on our campus, and sometimes individuals from underrepresented groups, they see that social sort of component in a different way as a majority group, and somehow that person then all of a sudden becomes a bad fit for the group. So we've actually had to force our faculty to face the issue that they've been doing that to some extent. Okay, and that can be a real tough thing. Grady mentioned that's a tough thing to force someone to take a look at. So even though you think you might be inclusive, you have a component of how you look at something that in a way is actually acting in an exclusionary manner.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic point. Yeah, thank you for your discussion, both of you. Moving on. Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
I just wanted to add on to what Corey was saying, something that we talked about in our institute. We had a couple of different things with one activity really working with helping our participants step into maybe situations of conflict or just hard conversations, and trying to make them aware of how they might be able to have these courageous conversations. As Corey mentioned, if you are one of the only individuals that are speaking up about this, and that can be a really tough situation to be in. Also, if you are maybe an early career faculty in your departmental meeting, how might you be able to bring this to the attention of others? And so also just being mindful of all of that, and providing training for the individuals that may need to kind of be the voice in these rooms to be able to talk about some of those issues, or something that I know we're trying to address in our grant, in addition to whiteness and white supremacy, but just privilege in general, and how that plays out in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Anne-Marie.
Hi, Anne-Marie.
Hi, I just wanted to say something very quickly, that the Field Institute is going to address issues, similar to what others have talked about, and also considering the role of colonization of the land and how that's kind of affected fieldwork and field experiences. So we're going to have experts in Native American history and those kinds of issues to be able to also address the historical context of the field. And I just wanted to add that.
Oh, that's fantastic. I didn't know that was going to be a component of the field project. That sounds wonderful. Excellent. Well, thank you all. We only have a minute or two left, so I have one more question that came through, and it's kind of hard after that hard-hitting question. But it's this question of scalability. And so how can we scale up these projects and this general gold effort and initiative to make appreciable impacts to our community at large? Do we right now have any ideas about being able to scale these things up? Is it totally dependent on future NSF funding? What thoughts do we all have on that?
I can speak to our grant very briefly, the Sparks for Change. I think one of the things that we think is powerful about our grant is that we're using these small groups, and oftentimes there may be a couple of individuals within a department that are seeking to make change. And so we're really trying to focus on, what are ways that individuals within a department that want to focus on diversity and inclusion issues, how they can come together, be very focused in their planning, and then be able to kind of institute that change within our department and maybe beyond. And that's hopefully something that can be modeled at other institutions. So we're trying to keep it at this small scale and collecting a lot of data and analysis about this so that it could potentially be able to be used at other institutions.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Anyone else want to chime in? Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
Aspire, you know, because we're modeling this as a virtual center. It was one of the things we had discussed when we wrote this, is that we've had a lot of NSF centers for, you know, things like ecology and, you know, genomics, but you've never really, even though this has been a priority for NSF, there's never really been a center, something at a center level that focuses on issues of inclusion and diversity in the sciences. And so, you know, that would be sort of the next scaling, something that's centralized, you know, with centralized staffing, you know, something that can reach out to the different disciplines that NSF is trying to reach. That way, because we have a lot of these efforts, but they tend to be, you know, siloed from each other, not intentionally, because it's just the nature of how grants are. So something where, you know, individuals as groups can come together and work on these at a broader scale.
Yeah, absolutely.